Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all on behalf of Applied Theatre India Foundation and Indian Council for Cultural Relations to this first ever virtual two-day conference on role of applied theatre in Indian society. This is the second day of our conference. And we thank you all for your awesome responses and comments on our FB page yesterday. Guys, yesterday our speakers present their research mainly on applied theatre's role in education and in social areas. Today, our speaker, Dr. Radhika Jain, focuses on applying playback theatre to explore diversity and inclusion in corporates. I welcome Dr. Radhika Jain. Dr. Radhika Jain is from Bangalore. She did her leadership training from the Center for Playback Theatre, USA, along with a foundation course in expressive arts therapy. She is also a PhD holder in molecular microbiology from Hans Noll Institute, Germany. I request Radhika to present her research on applying playback theatre to explore diversity and inclusion in corporates. Over to you, Radhika.
Thank you, Vishali, for that kind introduction. And just share my screen. Yeah. Picturize this, a corporate setting. The place has an open culture in terms of being very, open and not so hierarchical. However, it is still a workplace. Now, in this setting, a senior manager opens up about a moment in his life when he had felt very low, very alone. Others in the room have probably never seen this side of him before. They intently listen as he shares his story. That's the power of the personal story. To quote Joe Salas, the co-founder of Playback Theatre, when we weave our experience into stories, we find meaning in what we have undergone. Telling our stories to others helps us to integrate the story's meaning for us personally. It is a way, too, for us to contribute to the universal quest for meaning. The intrinsic element of form in a story can transmute chaos and restore a sense of belonging to a world that is fundamentally purposeful after all. Even the most desperately painful of experiences are in some ways redeemed when they are told as stories. My talk today explores how, using playback theatre, organizations can tap into the power of these personal stories. This talk will reflect back on my company, First Drop Theatre's experience of using playback theatre as an intervention tool at different corporate settings to address diversity and inclusion, how it has helped these organizations understand the feelings and challenges that the workforce currently have around this topic, and at the same time, how it has helped employees gain a wider perspective around diversity and inclusion through the power of shared real-life stories. Before we go forward, what is playback theatre? A playback theatre is an improvisational, non-scripted, interactive, community-based format of theatre, which was founded by Jonathan Fox and Joe Salas in the 1970s. Here, the actors play out real-life stories and moments shared by the audience members with text, movement, images, sounds, and metaphors. In playback theatre, the participant becomes a storyteller, and they witness an actor playing them in the improvisation. Storytelling and spontaneity are the basis for playback theatre. Here, the participants are guided by a trained conductor to tell stories from their lives, which are then played and replayed to the teller's satisfaction by the actors. Therefore, playback theatre enables a forum for dialogue, shared emotions, self-reflection, and also deep connections. So what we did was, we looked at how playback theatre could be used in two very different types of organizations. The first organization that we worked with was a large company with a strong hierarchical structure, and it was looking to address the issue of gender gap. The second organization that we worked with was an MNC with a more open culture, and it was introducing the concept of allyship as a means to have inclusion as a key tenet for their work culture. Now, coming to the first organization, you know that the gender gap, especially at the higher levels in an organization in India, is quite big, with the women representation at the middle level and the senior levels being as low as around 20% and 11% respectively. In fact, in the first organization that we worked with, the ratio was further skewed, with women making up only 8% of the workforce. Here, the idea was to use playback theatre to explore how leadership was viewed through the prism of gender. We kept in mind that given the culture and structure of the space, the group might not be used to openly sharing their feelings. Therefore, the conductor of our team first got the audience to talk about themselves as to what they felt were generally easy or difficult for them as leaders. These feelings were then reflected back by the actors using short formats of playback theatre. This really helped to really get the group into the sharing mode. And what emerged was that the women felt that their voices were often missed, while the men in the group mentioned about feeling inhibited while interacting with the women, as they were worried about how they were being perceived. Watching these perceptions being enacted seemed to help the group open up on situations where the stereotypes played out strongly. So we dived deeper into these perception models by looking at how the men and women in the audience viewed each other specifically as leaders. The men, for example, felt that while the women leaders are very focused and task-driven, they fail to take risks. The women felt that the men do a good job of delegation, but are not always sensitive. The actors played back these feelings through the use of metaphors. The awareness that the space was open to all voices and perspectives seemed to bring about uninhibited sharing. And when the participants heard the experience from the standpoint of others and watched the enactment by the actors, they seemed to become more aware of possible discriminations. After watching the acts, when the conductor checked back with the audience, they mentioned that these were like new perspectives that they were seeing to everyday situations. Well, this included incidents in situations like regular workplace meetings, specific project discussions, and even team outings. Now, an interesting revelation was about how the similar situation was perceived differently by leaders from the two genders. A lady manager shared about an incident where she was the lone woman in a meeting with a group of men, and how she felt the men were insensitive to her presence and that she felt very uncomfortable. A male member from the audience mentioned about another meeting where there was only one woman present, and he observed that his male colleagues were not being sensitive to her presence in the way that they cracked certain jokes, etc. He said that he did not make it a point to react by speaking up for the woman, as he wasn't sure if he should make this to be a gender-related thing, as it could just be that in a group, some people, irrespective of gender, might be okay with certain things, while others might not be. Now, what did the actors do? The actors used the format, corridors, which reflected the thoughts of both the tellers from a similar situation. Post the depictions, both the tellers mentioned how they were now reflecting a bit deeper about their own assumptions and expectations. Especially the man reflected that. While talking further about challenges faced, a lady participant spoke about the time during an office offsite when she, being the lone woman, felt restricted to reach out for help when she faced a very scary situation. She said that she was hesitant to ask for help as she was worried about being judged. She reminisced about how she braved the situation on her own. This story was depicted by the actors in a long story format on the spot. And when the act concluded, the audience group reflected that while the story was remarkable in terms of a person finding the inner strength, it also allowed them to see the need for proactive inclusion and sensitivity. Such stories, freely shared by the participating audience members, was a welcome opportunity for them to share their views in an uninhibited manner. Given the highly hierarchical environment, playback theatre showed promise in having the participants open up in a way they might not usually do. In this environment, where perceptions ran very strong and the traditional stereotypes were strongly prevalent, playback theatre was going beyond the surface of the persona and bringing out the motives, challenges, and feelings of the person. By giving space to multiple voices, there was a chance for the audience members to see the common situations from the work environment through different angles. Coming to the second organization. Well, the second organization we engaged with was a large MNC with a more open and a less hierarchical setup. This organization had been running different diversity and inclusion related programs for over the years and were keen to bring in the understanding of allyship and to see how being allies to one another could bring about greater inclusion. Well, in India, where the workforce in organizations comprise of people from different backgrounds, be it religions, language, customs, beliefs, etc., allies at workplace have an important role in making each other feel included. Before we commenced the playback theatre performance here, there was a short activity done where the audience members had to pair up and do some sharing about themselves with each other. The conductor started the playback performance by asking how it felt to hear the other person out and how it felt to be heard by the other person. The audience shared about how they felt a sense of familiarity with the other and the joy of discovering something new about a person. These feelings were reflected back by the actors using short formats. This sharing with each other and watching the reflection of these feelings seemed to help the audience understand this to be a space where they could hear and also be heard. And yet, a deeper shift happened when a senior manager in the group shared his experience of how he missed having an ally when he was going through a crisis in the family and had to shift back to India from abroad. The actors played back the feeling of desperation, feeling of loneliness and anxiety in a format using poetry, movement, and sound. This vulnerability displayed by a leader seemed to uncork a deeper sharing of personal stories from within the audience. It seemed to have encouraged the others to open up more about their emotions, as they seemed to be having this assurance that playback theatre was providing them with a safe space to go deep into their personal experiences. Like in this story shared by a lady who spoke about how she assumed an initiative that she was doing would help a certain section of the society, only to later realize that her perceived sense was inaccurate. She openly spoke about how the experience made her realize that she was privileged and was operating from that space. She reflected on how the experience made her aware of how much more can be done if she were to be an ally to that group. Now, this led to the point about what might be a deterrent to being an ally, were perceptions and assumptions playing up for all, or were there other experiences that might be holding them back? Among other things, an erosion of trust due to a past experience emerged as a point in one of the personal sharings. One person opened about how an earlier experience of trusting someone only to be let down made him wary of similar situations. He spoke about how this lack of trust cast a doubt in his mind for a long time until one day when a stranger's act of kindness reaffirmed his confidence to be an ally. We use another narrative V format to show the journey of the teller's emotional state. As these stories were shared, there was a perceptible shift in how the others in the room were beginning to voice their concerns, beginning to voice their vulnerabilities and changed perceptions. The aspects of privilege, region, religion, and gender, and how these influences the notion of allyship were reflected on by the group in the context of their own personal stories. The mindful reflection of different individuals about regular situations made it relatable to the larger group. Playback theater was giving them a safe space to hear and to be heard. So what is the potential of playback theater in corporates? From our experience, we saw that there was an acknowledgement by several members of the audience in both the performances and the many that we have done, and about how it has been a deeper experience for them to explore the subject, especially of diversity and inclusion, through this experiential tool. When people having differing, strong opinions, then playback theater is instrumental in building up the atmosphere that encourages all voices to come out. The conductor plays an important role here. The conductor makes sure that different voices are heard, different personal stories are given space. Here, the participants mentioned that they had been part of other modes also, for example, talks, seminars, presentations that have addressed the subject of diversity and inclusion. However, many of the participants observed that reflecting by watching the real life experience of theirs and others being enacted really reinforced certain things stronger while also giving a human touch to perspectives which were different from theirs. Playback theater, personal stories, and the power of personal stories. We realize there's a lot to be done in this field of diversity and inclusion, and yet we've only started. And playback theater has a great potential to bring the humaneness in the corporate space, bring empathy in corporate space, to bring multiple voices in the corporate space, and all through personal stories. Thank you.
Whoa, this is the awesome start of the day 2 of this conference. Great presentation by Dr. Radhika. Yes, personal sharing and communicating with help of applying theatre at any workplace, including corporate, is a really effective to improve safe space and positivity at that place. Thank you so much, Radhika, for sharing your valuable time and your presentation with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vishali.
It's my pleasure, Radhika. And here we have take a short break and we'll be back at 1 p.m. with Shri Dakshin Bajrange from Ahmedabad. Stay with us. Thank you so much.